I spent years saving our failing family business only to be betrayed. Watching it now implode is the greatest revenge. I come from a family that's been in the restaurant business for 3 generations. My grandfather, Giuseppe, immigrated to the United States from Italy in the late 1940s with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and his nonna's secret recipes. He started with a small diner in 1952, serving up hearty Italian-American fare that quickly became the talk of our little town. My father, Anthony, grew up in that diner, learning the business from the ground up. He had bigger ambitions than running a single restaurant, though. In the 1980s, he took over the business and began expanding. He kept Grandpa's original diner as the flagship but opened new locations with a more modern, family-style concept. By the time I was born in the early 90s, we had 5 restaurants across the state. Growing up, those restaurants were my second home. I spent my summers bussing tables, my weekends helping in the kitchens, and my school breaks learning about inventory and bookkeeping. My older brother, Michael, was never interested in the family business. He was more concerned with chasing girls and playing in his garage band. But for me, the restaurants were everything. I can still remember the pride in my father's eyes when I told him I wanted to study business administration in college. "That's my boy," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "One day, all of this will be yours." By the time I graduated college in 2015, our family empire had grown to 15 locations across 3 states. We were a regional powerhouse, known for our generous portions, family-friendly atmosphere, and of course, Grandpa Giuseppe's famous lasagna. I was eager to join the company full-time and help take it to the next level. Little did I know, I was stepping into a ticking time bomb. My first day at the corporate office was a wake-up call. I walked in expecting to find a well-oiled machine, but instead, I stepped into chaos. The receptionist was on the phone arguing with a supplier about late payments. The marketing team was huddled around a computer, trying to figure out how to respond to a scathing review that had gone viral. And my father? He was holed up in his office, door closed, ignoring it all. Over the next few weeks, I dug into the company's operations, and what I found shocked me. Years of mismanagement and my father's reluctance to adapt to changing trends had left the business in a precarious position. Sales were declining across all locations, with some barely breaking even. Costs were out of control, with no standardized processes for ordering or inventory management. And morale among the staff was at an all-time low, leading to high turnover and inconsistent customer experiences. One particularly eye-opening moment came when I visited our flagship diner, Grandpa's original location. What had once been a bustling community hub was now a shadow of its former self. The vinyl booths were cracked and faded, the menu hadn't been updated in years, and the kitchen equipment was on its last legs. Worst of all, the food quality had slipped. Grandpa's famous lasagna, once a transcendent experience, now tasted like it came from a frozen TV dinner. I spent months analyzing every aspect of the business, from menu design to supply chain logistics. I interviewed staff at all levels, pored over financial reports, and even spent time as a secret shopper in our own restaurants and those of our competitors. The picture that emerged was grim, but I was determined to turn things around. I compiled my findings and recommendations into a comprehensive plan to modernize our operations, streamline costs, and revitalize our brand. When I presented it to my father, his initial reaction was dismissive. "This is how we've always done things," he said, waving his hand. "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." But it was broke, and I had the numbers to prove it. It took weeks of arguments, presentations, and finally, an intervention from our longtime accountant, who warned we'd be bankrupt within 2 years if we didn't change course, before my father reluctantly agreed to let me implement my changes. With my father's begrudging blessing, I threw myself into saving our family legacy. For the next 3 years, I lived and breathed the business. I worked 80-hour weeks, often sleeping on the couch in my office. My personal life became non-existent. I broke up with my girlfriend, missed my best friend's wedding, and barely saw my family outside of work. I started by addressing our biggest issues. 1. Menu revamp. I brought in a talented young chef to help us update our menu. We kept the classics that made us famous but introduced healthier options and trendy items to attract a younger crowd. We also standardized recipes across all locations to ensure consistency. 2. Staff training. I personally visited every location to retrain our staff. We implemented a new customer service protocol, enhanced food safety measures, and created a career development program to improve retention. 3. Supply chain overhaul. I renegotiated contracts with our suppliers and implemented a new inventory management system to reduce waste and cut costs. 4. Restaurant renovations. We closed a few underperforming locations and used the capital to renovate our remaining restaurants. The new design was modern but still family friendly, with a nod to our Italian-American roots. 5. Marketing push. We embraced social media marketing, partnered with food bloggers, and launched a loyalty program to bring in new customers and keep them coming back. The changes weren't easy, and there was plenty of resistance along the way. Some long-time employees quit, unable to adapt to the new systems. A few loyal customers complained about the menu changes. And my father second-guessed nearly every decision, often trying to revert to the old ways behind my back. But slowly, things started to turn around. Within 6 months, we had stopped the bleeding. By the end of the first year, most locations were profitable again. And by year 2, we were outperforming our best years. The turnaround didn't go unnoticed. Food critics praised our revamped menu and improved service. The local business journal ran a feature on our remarkable comeback, dubbing me the Restaurant Whisperer. We even won a regional award for Best Family Restaurant Chain. Perhaps the most satisfying moment came when we reopened Grandpa's original diner after a complete renovation. We had preserved its classic charm while bringing it into the 21st century. The night before the grand reopening, I found my father sitting alone in one of the booths, tears in his eyes. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, pulling me into a rare hug. "You saved his legacy." By year 3, we were firing on all cylinders. We opened 3 new locations, including our first in a major city. We were looking at franchise opportunities and even considering expanding into catering and meal prep services. The future looked brighter than ever. I was exhausted but proud of what we had accomplished. For the first time in years, I decided to take a vacation. I planned a 2-week trip to Italy, a chance to explore our roots and maybe find some inspiration for new menu items. The night before I was set to leave, I worked late putting the finishing touches on a proposal for our first franchise location. As I turned off the lights in my office, I felt a sense of contentment. Little did I know, it was the calm before the storm. I was halfway through my trip, sitting at a charming trattoria in Tuscany, when I received the call that would change everything. It was Lisa, my assistant, and she was frantic. "You need to come back," she said, her voice shaking. "Something's happening, and it's not good." I caught the next flight home, my mind racing with possibilities. Had there been an accident? A health code violation? A lawsuit? Nothing could have prepared me for the truth. As my taxi pulled up to the corporate office, I saw unfamiliar cars in the parking lot, sleek, expensive vehicles that screamed outside investors. With a growing sense of dread, I made my way to the main conference room. The scene that greeted me was like something out of a bad movie. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by my brother Michael, who I hadn't seen in months, and a man I didn't recognize. Around the table were our board members, all avoiding eye contact with me. "Ah, the prodigal son returns," the stranger said with a smirk. "I'm Victor Drummond. Your father and I have some news for you." Over the next hour, my world came crashing down. It turned out my father, along with Michael, had been plotting behind my back for months. They had brought in Victor, a slick entrepreneur with a reputation for flipping companies, who had convinced them to take the business in a new direction. Victor's plan was to take the company public, promising riches beyond their wildest dreams. But his vision for the future didn't include me. I was, in his words, too attached to the old way of doing things to be part of this bold new future. My own father looked me in the eye and told me my services were no longer required. They offered me a pittance of a severance package, an insulting fraction of the value I'd brought to the company, and told me to clean out my office by the end of the day. I was in shock. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "how could you do this? After everything we've been through, everything I've done for this company?" He couldn't even look at me as he replied, "It's just business, son. Nothing personal." But it was personal. As security escorted me out of the building, I saw Victor and Michael laughing in the conference room. The betrayal cut deep, and for weeks, I could barely get out of bed. The hardest part wasn't losing my job or even the business I'd poured my heart into. It was the realization that my family, the people I trusted most in the world, had conspired against me. Every memory, every family dinner, every moment of pride I thought we'd shared became tainted. Had they been planning this all along? How long had I been a pawn in their game? In the days that followed, I learned more about what had transpired. Michael, it turned out, had reconnected with an old college buddy who knew Victor. They had painted me as an obstacle to growth, someone too conservative and set in my ways. They convinced my father that my changes, while successful in the short term, weren't thinking big enough. Victor's plan was to streamline operations even further, cut unnecessary costs, like our locally sourced ingredients and employee benefits, and expand aggressively through franchising. The goal was to inflate the company's value as quickly as possible and then go public, cashing out for a fortune. I tried to warn them. I called, I emailed, I even showed up at my parents' house. But I was shut out at every turn. My father refused to speak to me, my calls went straight to voicemail, and my mother tearfully told me to give it time when I showed up at their door. For a while, I was lost. The restaurants had been my whole life, my identity. Without them, who was I? I fell into a deep depression, barely leaving my apartment for weeks. Friends tried to reach out, but I pushed them away. How could I explain the depth of this betrayal? It was rock bottom, and I knew something had to change. As the initial shock and depression began to fade, it was replaced by a slow-burning anger. I started to channel that anger into action. First, I hired a lawyer to review my severance agreement and the circumstances of my termination. While it was clear they had planned this carefully to avoid legal repercussions, we did manage to negotiate a slightly better severance package. Next, I started to rebuild my life. I updated my resume, reconnected with industry contacts, and began to explore new opportunities. It was during this time that I realized just how much respect I had gained in the restaurant world during my years turning around the family business. As I slowly pieced my life back together, I couldn't help but watch from afar as my family's company began to unravel. At first, things seemed to be going according to Victor's plan. They announced an aggressive expansion, planning to double the number of locations within a year through franchising. But cracks started to appear almost immediately. Victor, it turned out, was more interested in short-term profits than long-term sustainability. He began implementing draconian cost-cutting measures that eroded the quality we were known for. My brother, who had been installed as the new COO despite having zero restaurant experience, was in way over his head. Staff turnover skyrocketed as experienced managers and chefs left in droves, unable to work under the new regime. Customer complaints flooded in as portion sizes shrank and quality declined. The farm-to-table concept I had nurtured was scrapped in favor of cheaper, pre-packaged ingredients. Our famous lasagna, once made fresh daily, was replaced by a frozen version. Regular customers noticed the difference immediately, and word spread quickly. I heard through the grapevine that my father was having second thoughts, but it was too late. He had signed ironclad contracts giving Victor significant control over the company's direction. Within 6 months, the cracks were starting to show publicly. Negative reviews piled up on Yelp and Google. A health code violation at one of the new franchise locations made the local news. The ambitious expansion plans were put on hold as potential franchisees got spooked by the declining reputation. I'll admit, part of me wanted to reach out and offer my help. I still cared about the employees, many of whom I had hired and mentored personally. But then I remembered the look of disdain on my father's face as he fired me, and my resolve hardened. They had made their bed, now they could lie in it. Instead, I focused on my own path forward. I started doing consulting work for other restaurant groups, helping them implement the same kinds of reforms that had turned around my family's business. Word of my success spread, and soon I had more work than I could handle. It was during this time that I met Sarah, a talented chef who had recently left one of my family's restaurants due to the changes. We bonded over our shared passion for the industry and our frustration with short-sighted management. What started as a professional collaboration soon blossomed into something more. With Sarah, I found not just a romantic partner but a kindred spirit in the culinary world. We spent our dates trying new restaurants, experimenting with recipes, and dreaming up concepts for our own place. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt hopeful about the future. Over the next year, I watched as the empire I had worked so hard to save crumbled before my eyes. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, horrifying, but impossible to look away from. The aggressive expansion had stretched the company's resources too thin. New locations were opening without proper training or quality control, leading to wildly inconsistent experiences. The brand that had once stood for reliable, quality family dining was now becoming synonymous with disappointment. Financial troubles started to mount. I heard from former colleagues that suppliers, who hadn't been paid in months, began taking legal action. The company's credit rating tanked, making it impossible to secure new loans to keep the expansion going. Locations started closing one by one. First, it was the newer franchises, unable to turn a profit. Then, even some of the established restaurants began to shutter. Each closure was like a punch to the gut. I knew the families that had worked in those places, the regular customers who had made them part of their lives. Victor, seeing the writing on the wall, bailed on the company, leaving my father and brother holding the bag. I heard he had managed to extract a hefty payout before jumping ship, leaving the company in even dire straits. My father and brother tried desperately to right the ship, even reaching out to me for help. I received a voicemail from my father, his voice cracking as he admitted he had made a terrible mistake. Part of me wanted to rush in and save the day, but a larger part knew it was too late. The damage had been done, not just to the business, but to our relationship. Instead, I sent them a detailed memo outlining what I thought needed to be done to salvage what was left of the company. Whether out of pride or desperation, they implemented some of my suggestions. But it was like putting a band-aid on a gushing wound. The final blow came when an investigative journalist published an exposé on the company's decline. The article detailed the cost-cutting measures, the quality decline, and the financial mismanagement. It even hinted at some potentially illegal actions taken by Victor during his tenure. Last month, I read in the local paper that my family's once proud restaurant chain had filed for bankruptcy. All remaining locations were closed, and assets were being liquidated to pay off creditors. My father and brother were facing potential legal troubles for financial mismanagement. The article was a gut punch. Despite everything that had happened, seeing our family name dragged through the mud was painful. I couldn't help but think of all the employees who were now out of work, the suppliers left unpaid, and the communities that had lost a local institution. What hit me hardest was the photo accompanying the article. It showed the original diner, my grandfather's pride and joy, with a for sale sign in the window. The sign that had once proudly displayed our family name was gone, leaving behind a faded outline on the brick facade. In the days that followed, my phone was flooded with calls and messages. Former employees reached out, some angry, others just sad and looking for answers. Old family friends expressed their condolences as if there had been a death in the family. In a way, I suppose there had been. I even received a call from an old regular customer, Mrs. Rossi, who had been coming to our flagship diner every Sunday for as long as I could remember. "I just wanted you to know," she said, her voice wavering, "that I still have the recipe for your grandfather's tiramisu that you gave me on my 80th birthday. It's not the same as having the real thing, but it's a piece of your family's legacy I'll always treasure." That conversation with Mrs. Rossi was a turning point for me. It made me realize that while the business might be gone, the impact we had made, the memories we had created for so many people, couldn't be erased. As I sit here, sipping coffee and reading about the final death throes of the business I once loved, I'm surprised by the emotions swirling inside me. There's sadness, of course, for all the employees who lost their jobs and the customers who lost a beloved local institution. There's a twinge of regret for what could have been if things had gone differently. But mostly, I feel a sense of vindication. The company's implosion is the ultimate proof that I was right all along. My methods, my vision, my hard work, they were what kept the business afloat. Without me, it all fell apart. I won't lie, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that my father and brother are facing the consequences of their actions. They thought they could discard me and coast on the foundation I built. Instead, they drove the whole thing into the ground. Some might say I should feel guilty for not stepping in to help. But why should I? They made it clear that my contributions weren't valued. They chose greed and ego over family loyalty and sound business practices. In the end, karma delivered a more fitting punishment than I ever could have. Yet, as I reflect on everything that's happened, I realize that the greatest revenge isn't watching them fail. It's succeeding on my own terms. In the midst of watching my family's business collapse, I've been building something new. Remember Sarah, the chef I mentioned earlier? Well, our professional collaboration and personal relationship have both flourished. We've spent the past year planning and saving to open our own restaurant. It's a far cry from the large chain I used to run, just a single location, for now. But it's ours, and it embodies everything we believe a restaurant should be. We found a charming old building in the heart of downtown. It needed a lot of work, but we saw its potential. Sarah and I spent countless nights painting walls, refinishing floors, and hunting for the perfect decor at flea markets and estate sales. Every inch of the place has our personal touch. Our concept is farm-to-table Italian with a modern twist. We've partnered with local farms to source the freshest ingredients, just like I did during the turnaround of my family's business. Our menu changes seasonally, sometimes even weekly, based on what's available and at its peak. In a nod to my roots, we've included a few of my grandfather's original recipes, including his famous lasagna and tiramisu. But we've updated them, using Sarah's culinary expertise to elevate them to new heights. We even tracked down Mrs. Rossi and invited her to be our first official customer. The grand opening was last week, and the response has been overwhelming. We've been booked solid, with waiting lists stretching weeks. Food critics have praised our innovative yet comforting dishes, and our commitment to quality and sustainability. What's most gratifying is the team we've built. Many of our staff are former employees from my family's restaurants, people who believed in me and jumped at the chance to work together again. There's a sense of family here, but one built on mutual respect and shared passion rather than obligation and hierarchy. As for me, I've started my own restaurant consulting firm on the side, using the skills and experience I gained during those intense years of rebuilding. Word of my success with my family's business had spread, and I quickly found clients eager for my expertise. Ironically, the publicity surrounding my family's business collapse has only added to my reputation. I'm now known as the guy who performed a miracle turnaround, only to have it squandered by short-sighted management after my departure. It's not the legacy I imagined, but I'll take it. It's been about a year since the bankruptcy, and life has taken some unexpected turns. My consulting business has flourished beyond my wildest dreams. I've helped turn around several struggling restaurants and even opened 2 more locations of our successful farm-to-table concept. Last week, I received a letter from my father. It was a long, rambling apology, filled with regret and pleas for forgiveness. He admitted that pushing me out was the biggest mistake of his life and that he'd give anything to turn back time. Part of me wanted to toss the letter in the trash, but I found myself reading it over and over. The letter revealed some things I hadn't known. Apparently, my father had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's just before all the drama went down. He kept it a secret from everyone, even my mother. The fear of losing control, of becoming a burden, had driven him to make rash decisions. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps me understand it a little better. Yesterday, I heard through the grapevine that my brother has been working as a waiter, trying to learn the business from the ground up the way I did all those years ago. It's a humbling experience for him, I'm sure, but probably a necessary one. As for me, I'm considering reaching out to them. Not to gloat or to offer financial help, but to see if there's any way to rebuild our family relationship. The business may be gone, but maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance to salvage something more important. Sarah thinks I'm crazy for even considering it, but she supports me. Family is complicated, she says. But it's also irreplaceable. Just be careful not to let them hurt you again. The restaurant industry has taught me many lessons over the years, but perhaps the most important is this: in both food and life, it's not just about the ingredients you start with, but how you handle them when the heat is on. Our family recipe might need some serious adjusting, but with the right care and attention, even the most overcooked relationships can sometimes be saved. I've decided to invite my father and brother to dinner at our restaurant next week. I'm nervous, excited, and a little scared. But I'm also hopeful. Who knows? Maybe years from now, I'll be posting an update about the grand opening of a new family restaurant, one built on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom and mutual respect. Until then, I'll keep doing what I do best, turning struggling eateries into culinary success stories, one plate at a time. And I'll remember that success isn't just about profits or accolades. It's about creating something meaningful, treating people with respect, and staying true to your values even when it's difficult. Thanks for reading, Reddit. It feels good to finally share my story. Remember, success is the best revenge, but forgiveness? That might just be the sweetest dish of all. Edit. Wow, this blew up overnight. Thanks for all the supportive comments and awards. Edit 2. Since so many people are asking, I'll give you an update on the dinner with my family. It was intense. There were tears, shouting, and at one point I thought my brother was going to storm out. But we got through it. We're not magically one big happy family again, but it's a start. We've agreed to family therapy, and my brother is going to do a stage at our restaurant to learn the ropes properly. It's going to be a long road, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Thanks for all the support, Reddit. You guys are amazing.